Chapter 19. It had been an hour short of midday when the nervy owl hoots succeeded in robbing the stage. So swiftly did events occur thereafter that noon saw Pat, Stevens, and Spain hiding the recovered boxes of gold concentrate up there in the rocks. "Now," Pat grunted as soon as they were done, "we'd best ride back to the stage first and shake out the rest of those horses." Pat grinned at him tightly. "What do you think took me so long?" "Mean you already did? Good boy." Pat nodded. "Then we'll hit across them hills and strike for the upper trail." Early afternoon found them climbing the steep grades, and by 4 o'clock they were drawing near the mining camp. A mile below, Pat turned off the road. "It would suit me," he remarked in reply to Spain's inquiring look, "to drift in from some unexpected direction just this once." The going was rough in the heavy undergrowth and down timber, but Pat's roundabout course was not without design. Roy peered at the first buildings they approached through the thick firs and stifled exclamation. "Why, that must be the building where we found Hunter," he began. Vern assented. "No harm in learning if he's around still." They rode forward quietly and unseen and were rounding the corner of the log structure when Spain hauled in abruptly to stare across in the direction of the Bonanza house. "Uh-oh, he's come out of hiding, Stevens," he muttered. "There he is over there with Brute Redford." It was so. The two men were standing in deep conversation before the hotel. So immersed were they in what passed in between them that they paid no attention to anyone else. "This is just right," Pat murmured. "We'll shove on over there." But he dismounted first to stride across the plaza with Spain at his elbow. They were not a dozen feet away when it became apparent that Redford was giving Vern Hunter a hard time of it. "This wandering around in public is strictly against my orders, mister," they heard him throw at the younger man bluffly. Hunter murmured something in reply with a triumphant air which they didn't catch. "What's that again?" Redford caught him up harshly. "What is this grand surprise that you're so sure will please me?" As Pat and Spain halted behind him, Hunter turned slightly to point with dramatic manner towards 4 persons mounted on horses at that moment riding into the plaza between the scattered buildings. Roy followed the gesture with a tight-set face and his mouth fell open. Brute Redford appeared about equally jolted as he turned stolidly to observe Ches Denton jogging coolly forward. Behind him, a white-faced girl bound in her saddle, a heavily armed rough poised on either side of her. "Well," Redford stared hard at the girl, his well-controlled features not relaxing in the slightest. "What's the meaning of this, Hunter?" Vern showed jubilant excitement. "Don't you recognize her?" he tossed back with ringing confidence. "That's old Follonsbees' girl, man. The one who's been giving us so many headaches. She's given Larkins plenty of trouble there on the pitchstones and even went to a lawyer down there in the Powder Valley. Her mistake was coming to Avalanche. Don't you get it, Redford? This is our chance." He gazed into Brute's face and as if wondering at his obtuseness. "Hell yes, this is a fine chance if only I could figure it out." Redford was extremely disgruntled. "Just what is it you plan to do with her?" he demanded scathingly. "Oh, that?" Hunter's chesty laugh said that he thought he was saving the best surprise for last. "It means, Redford, that I've brought my future bride home." Della visibly shrank as the bold words struck her. She had kept up her courage this far, but she was on a ragged edge. Not even she was prepared for it when Spain ran forward, unable to contain his rage, and whirled Hunter around with a rough hand on his shoulder. "You'll never marry her, Hunter," he rifled hotly. "I can tell you that before you begin." The bitter defiance was scarcely out of his mouth when he unleashed a murderous haymaker which caught Hunter wholly unprepared and tumbled him full length on the ground. Ches Denton followed this from his seat in a saddle with what passed for a well-bred disfavor. "Hold on!" he thrust in smoothly. "Not much use of you two acting a fool over this. If you think that I toiled and brought her up here for either, you're crazy," he declared brazenly. But in that instant of his downfall, Hunter had gone far beyond this stage of reasoning. From the moment of hiring Roy Spain to operate the stages, he had patronized the young fellow and looked down on him. That Roy should display the boldness of even pretending to compete with him for the Follonsbees girl, regardless of her wishes, was scarcely to be borne. Vern found his knees and sprang up with a cougarish ferocity, and straight at Spain he hurtled, the bold handsomeness in his face giving way to the look of ruthless brutality. He was bigger by 40 pounds or even more. Roy strove forward to meet his onslaught, but Hunter's first sledge-like blow rocked him badly. The second beat him to his knees. He struggled up in time to receive Hunter's vicious kick, striking him squarely in the groin, and down he went again, knotted with pain, and he was helpless from this moment at least. Pat stepped in the way, almost absently, when Hunter would have rushed in to attack Spain and finished him off. Raising his voice, he addressed Redford in such a manner that all could hear. "Never ran into anything exactly like this before, but it looks uncommonly like open season," Pat said calmly and clearly. "That being the case, I'll just lay claim to the girl myself. Ask her if she'll have me." It was so boldly done that for a moment every one of the men paused arrested. As he stood there, lean-hipped, manly, and alert, none could deny the veracity which rendered his claim valid. Certainly none immediately challenged him. A gleam could be detected in Redford's cold eyes as he speculated, thin lips tightening on the cigar in his teeth. "Well, it's mighty unusual, but that'll be all right, Stevens," he said slowly. "If I could just be sure that you was one of us." Not yet had Pat forced his featherweight control over the submerged forces so blindly at play here. Without the slightest alteration in his cool tone, he played his ace. "Reckon we're none of us straining at ants there, Redford," he smiled thinly. "I'm ready to accept my cut of the pile her dad was fleeced of." He permitted a shrewd expression to flit across his stern brazen features. "That should make me one of the crowd." Redford laughed jarringly, a faint surprise slitting his eyes. He must have been aware of more than one argument against Pat's proposal, including the fact that the latter had done nothing to earn the money he so boldly demanded. But he neglected to mention them. "Know about that, do you? Cute of you, Stevens," he boomed. "And by God, I'll do it." Others showed far less pleasure over Pat's cold brass than the outlaw leader. A group had gathered here on the moment that passed, taking it all in. If Ezra and Sam penetrated the meaning of their friend's maneuver, no glint of comprehension appeared on their wooden faces. But as they watched narrowly, as Denton's countenances clouded with anger, nor did they miss the manner in which his fingers tightened upon his gun, only to fall away slowly. Roy Spain lay still on the ground, blinking as he listened to the downhearted misery. Matters had long gone since had gotten out of his hand, and he could only pity the look of poorly concealed terror which held Della mute. As if any felt at this moment the sting of rage, it was Hunter. Vern darted snake-like looks from Pat to Redford and back again, asking himself how far these men dared to go with this farce, which had become to him a nightmare. Redford turned to him hardly. He read in Hunter's working features a persistent hope that all this was scarcely to be taken in deadly seriousness. The knowledge could not sway the flinty outlaw chief an iota. He had already weighed Pat Stevens against Hunter as his most useful and dependable lieutenant, and found Vern woefully lacking. It was a measure of Brute's ruthless character that he made no pretense of withholding the fatal blow. "Well, let's see now. You've got the stage line, Hunter," he rumbled. "I'm serving notice that you're to sign it over to Stevens. Free and clear, mind you. It was your share of the pitchstone rake-off, so that should make her about right." An electric thrill shot through Roy's spine as the words entered into his startled ears. He happened to be looking at Della at the moment and caught the flash of astonishment which flickered in her hazel eyes. Both instinctively gazed at Pat, wondering if he too had heard. The words dropped so coolly from Brute Redford's fat lips were proof in full of what they had traveled all the way to Montana to learn, without much hope until that moment. Yet, so still and attentive to the luckless Hunter did Stevens appear that he might have missed altogether the words which rang in their ears so vitally. The development of the next few seconds amply demonstrated that they were by no means as alert to the possibilities of the situations as Stevens promptly proved himself. In Redford's stony talk, Hunter read his fate. He took a step forward, those boldly cut features convulsing with venomous fury. "So this is your scheming, Stevens?" he yelled beside himself. "You burned my store in avalanche, deliberately trying to smash me, and now you've taken my job." Pat's face had never appeared more impassive. If there was a nerve in his body, it failed to reveal itself. "We understand each other, Hunter," he drawled with an almost insulting calm. "I was beginning to wonder when you'd figure it." It was too much for Vern. His face went pasty with desperation. Could looks have killed, the glare in his burning pupils have served his purpose now, and he stiffened. You devil! I ain't taking it, Stevens," he choked, and suddenly he went for his gun. Pat had been watching that twitching right hand, and he did not remove his slitting gaze from it now. As Hunter's Colt swept out of the holster, Stevens' gun crashed, and the slug took Vern in the bicep. His weapon wavered and sagged downward. Its discharge kicked up the dirt at his feet. Hunter staggered slightly, and he wasn't done yet. He seemed as game as he was rash. His left hand went to the aid of his right, and Pat's second shot smashed the bones in his left forearm as well, and then buried itself into his side. Still he struggled, sweat standing out on his tight brow, and to lift the heavy 6-gun. It jerked unsteadily upward. Before it could level, Stevens drove one more slug into the man, and it struck Vern flush in the chest. And like a tree with severed roots, he shuddered and sagged, and down he plunged onto his face, useless hands still clutching the gun against his smashed ribs. Except for an involuntary contraction, then, slowly relaxing, he didn't move again. "Hang it all, Stevens!" Redford's deep tones jerked the onlookers back to a tight awareness of the present. "I didn't hardly expect this." Pat raked him with sharp, measuring scrutiny. "Well, if you didn't, you're not as quick on the uptake as I thought. It was your doing, man," he snapped. "It was him or me, and I expected you to count on that." It was a flat challenge of a kind, calculated either to set off further fireworks or clear the air. Brute's heavy scowl relaxed, and he started to shrug. "Look here, Redford," a heavy voice broke in before he found time to speak. "Hunter may have slipped a time or two, but he was one of the boys. Don't tell me you aim to cover for this Stevens hombre. He's no better than a common spy." It was Denton who hollered, brazen of demur as ever. His feud with Pat, long since out in the open, he struck while the iron was hot. "Yeah, sure, Redford," another man called out gruffly. "Who is this Stevens anyway? What's he ever done for us?" Sam and Ezra tightened up, beginning to edge towards Pat, and Spain scrambled to his feet as the cry was taken up and was spreading. Clearly, Hunter had had supporters in this camp who did not intend to throw down the man's cause simply because he was dead. Glares were leveled at Pat, and the crowd began to thicken, churning restlessly. "All right, men," Redford held up a commanding hand. "Hunter stood his chances, and all your huff won't bring him back. Let's not get excited about this thing." The miners rumbled in angry rejection, and one or two jeers sounded. These men were whipping themselves up to take action, and if Redford was still master of the camp, it appeared only a question of minutes before his long dominance suffered an overthrow. Immunity from interference had made him arrogant, and he had gone too far. Even Brute's cronies were sliding away from him, their face darkening. One and all saw themselves eventually in Hunter's position, should chances turn against them, and they didn't relish the thought of it at all. "Give us a break, Redford," one of them cried out fiercely. "Kangaroo court! You'd better toss Stevens to us right now. If he gets through us alive, he can go free." With his cold steel, Redford had never been one to overlook defiance in any form. It had long been his way to top it with effrontery, which had made him the undisputed leader of all but nerveless men. He chose that course now, sweeping with disdain the wall of ugly faces that confronted him, and then abruptly striding towards them. "You pack of mangy coyotes!" he roared, in a well-simulated wrath. "Take me! We'll see if I can get through you alive!" He hurled a scathing contempt into the words which had no means without its effect. They fell back before him sullenly as he barged forward. No one attempted to lay a hand upon him, most of them struggling and escape a personal contact. Pat watched that dismay with ungrudgingly admiration, and not for a second missing what really went on here. It was significant that Redford's course took him towards the spot where Della still sat her horse, gazing numbly at this unlovingly spectacle of unleashed passions. With an iron hand, Redford whipped her bridle reins out of Ches Denton's grasp, and now even the stock dealer seemed to quail before his eye. When he turned, with a leer of scornful triumph, Redford led the girl's pony towards the Bonanza House steps, nor was there any in the crowd hardy enough to try and halt him. Sam Salone was ready, knife in hand. Quickly he slashed the girl's bonds and lifted her boldly upon the porch. Roy Spain was there to join her, and for a moment he supported her sagging weight with a steel-banded arm. The girl straightened then, attempting a pathetic smile, and Spain led her away from the porch's edge. It was none too soon. Once again the insistent crowd surged forward, gathering a fresh courage, and the clamor swelled up in an ugly volume. Denton appeared to have constituted himself their leader, and he urged them forward violently. "Give us Stevens, Redford," Ches demanded, with a fine show of indignation. "He's the cause of all this. The boys will never swallow him now that he's down Vern. The man's a killer. We'll give him a dose of his own medicine." Pat Stevens, meanwhile, had been far from idle. Thankful that Redford had afforded him this uninterrupted moment by swaggering into the limelight. "Get Dill inside, quick," he rasped to Spain, jerking his head towards the hotel. Redford, the faithful Buck Fraser, and Sam Salone and himself stumbled hurriedly up the steps behind Roy and the girl as the crowd crushed forward. There was a wolfish overtone to the angry uproar now which spelled trouble. It could not be long before hell broke loose here on the plaza that would swamp them unless they got out from under. "Let's go, man," Pat hurled at the big-bodied outlaw chief, hoping the other, despite his iron demeanor, would fail for once to note the utter absence of lanky Ezra in this crucial moment. "We'll have to barricade ourselves inside, Redford, till you figure us a way out of this jackpot." End of chapter 19.